Hey everyone, today I am going to talk to you about my experience with postpartum depression. If you don't know, I do Mommy Monday videos where I talk about my pregnancy experience, my birth experience, baby clothing hauls. I have a toddler now, but I just talk about things that I've got her, or I will be talking about other topics that have to do with babies, like breastfeeding. But postpartum depression was a big part of my life, and it's something that still, when I think about it, it hurts, and it's a big struggle. And I started my blog over a year ago with the intention of writing about my experience, because I know that when I was going through it, I looked and I didn't really find much at that time. Like, I was really just hoping to find somebody that went through what I went through and I could just get some hope. And postpartum depression affects people differently. Some people get it and they're really anxious, and it doesn't have anything to do with their relationship with their baby, where my relationship with my daughter, or the way that I was feeling, was terrible. Like, and it's going to sound really bad, and I get that. And so I hope that if you choose to watch this video, that you will refrain from judgment. If you haven't gone through something like this, it's really hard to understand. And I just hope that you will just listen and not judge. Obviously, I can't stop people from judging, but postpartum depression is such a serious issue, and more people talk about it now, but it's still something that a lot of people are afraid to talk about because there is a stigma with it. A lot of people hear about postpartum depression and they automatically think about the women on the news that killed their children, which is something I definitely thought about as well and I was afraid of. But it's nothing to be ashamed of, because it's something that you can't help. And I'm not really sure how I'm going to organize this video. I'm just going to talk and tell you about my experience, but I just want to say that if you are going through something like this, please know that there is hope. I felt, and I'll just go ahead and get into this. This video is going to be long, and I'll probably have to split it in two, but I really feel like I need to be honest. If you watched my birth story, and I will link that down below if you haven't, things did not go as planned, and I realized that as I was being wheeled to the room to have the emergency C-section, I started to feel off, and at the time I didn't know if it was fear or I'm not sure. I just kind of felt off, and I had talked about when I saw her for the first time, it was when they were taking her away. They just asked if I wanted to look at her. I didn't get to touch her or anything. And I looked over and I thought, wow, she looks really weird, like an alien or something. And all I could think about was how much I wanted water. And those next few days were really such a blur because I was on so much medication, and I would go to the room, try to nurse her, come back, just try to like get through each hour as it comes. My milk supply wasn't coming in. The NICU gave her formula, so the little tiny drops of milk that I was getting, she didn't want, and she didn't want to nurse. And breastfeeding was the one thing that I knew, like, during pregnancy, is like, I absolutely want to breastfeed. I had done a lot of research, and it was very important to me. We got discharged from the hospital after 4 days, and they only brought her out of the NICU the night before, so we had her then, and we went home. And we were living in a stressful situation. and that'll be probably a story for a different time, but we were living with my grandmother, and a few months before, my brother and my mother had come to live at the house as well, and it was just very stressful. My husband went back to work 2 days after I got home from the hospital. She still wasn't nursing, and I was still trying to get her to nurse, and my husband having to leave and be gone was really, really stressful. I don't know how women did it, and we put so much pressure on ourselves, but years ago, there's that saying that it took a village to raise a child, and that's because women had other women helping them. They had their mothers or their mother-in-law or their sisters or people in the community, and I didn't have that. I just was on my own with this baby that wouldn't stop crying. And the worst part is that I didn't feel like I loved her. I didn't even feel like she was my child, really. Like I wasn't connecting that baby that I was holding was the same baby that was in my body, that same baby that I loved. And it only got worse. I cried all the time. I felt so depressed. I felt like if my life ended, life would be so much easier. And then I also felt like if she died, I wouldn't be upset. And if she died, I could have my life back. I could have my normal routine back. And that sounds so bad, I know. And I truly believe that I was a bad person. I had struggled with depression before pregnancy, and I was actually on an antidepressant while I was pregnant. The antidepressant I was on was approved by my doctor. She said that it was fine to take, and I was on a low dose of it, but she said since I had been on it before I'd gotten pregnant, to pull me off during such a hormonal time, she didn't feel comfortable with that, and so I stayed on it. So when I started having these feelings, and having been on an antidepressant, it didn't cross my mind that it could be postpartum depression. And again, like I really wasn't in my right frame of mind. The day that they were discharging me, they had me do a questionnaire to see where you are mentally. And the way I answered the questions were alarming, you know, and it would ask you like, do you feel a sense of hopelessness? Do you feel more depressed than normal? Do you, and all these things, and I rated high on all of them. I went to my OB. I called my OB after like a week or two of not feeling normal. Like I wasn't getting better, I was getting worse. I went in, I told the receptionist how I was feeling, and they got me an appointment that day. And my mom drove me, which I was really grateful to at least have that, have someone to help me. Recovering from a C-section is not fun. I had a hard time walking, and I wasn't able to lift things, and I wasn't allowed to drive the first 2 weeks after giving birth. And I told my OB what was going on, and she was so tender. And she scooted up to like the edge of the table, and she held my hand, and she said, you know, baby blues are normal, but what you're experiencing is outside of my expertise. You seem to have postpartum depression, and you need to talk to somebody that can help you. And she had her team start calling psychiatrists for me, and also gave me names to a psychologist, and they actually called a couple for me. The big kind of issue was that a lot of the psychiatrists didn't take my type of insurance, and the initial visit would be $400, and $400 is a lot of money, and we didn't really have much money, and I was stressing out. But they were doing the phone calls for me, and they were waiting for some people to get back. So they gave me the names of the people they called, and they gave me referrals of people that they highly recommended. And they also asked me to call my insurance and see what they could do for me. Now my insurance kind of jerked me around, and they weren't really being helpful, and the names of the people that they knew covered me weren't calling me back. And after a couple days, my OB office called and the nurse practitioner called, and she asked me how I was doing and asked if I had been to see anybody yet. And I told her no. And she asked what my insurance said, and I told her what was going on with my insurance, and she was like, no, that is ridiculous. And she's like, do you want me to call? Because I will call. They cannot do this. This is a serious issue. You need to talk to somebody. She's like, let me call you back. About 10 or 15 minutes later, she called me back and she said, look, I am at Dr. So-and-so's office, and it was a psychiatrist that was on their floor. She's like, I talked to him. He said that he'll take your insurance. I'm in their office right now. I'm going to put you on the phone with the receptionist, and they are going to get you an appointment. And I was just blown away by the willingness to help. Like, so many doctors these days can just like push you in and out, prescribe you something, and get you out of there. And they took the time to follow up with me to make sure that I had seen someone. For her to do that was just really special and meaningful, and I felt like God had just like put these people there to help me. So I made an appointment with him, and then I also, the psychologist that was highly recommended by my OB, there was an issue with insurance, and I told her that it wasn't gonna work out, and she ended up calling me back and said that she was willing to lower her rate by a significant amount, which was amazing. So I went to see her, and she is a mother of two, and she had experienced postpartum depression herself. And I remember that she was telling me that this wasn't my fault and that I would get through this, and I just didn't believe it. Like, I just did not believe it. The way that I was feeling, I felt like I was just a bad person, and that because I was on medication before, that this couldn't be depression, that there's something just wrong with me. She suggested a couple books, and one of them was Down Came the Rain by Brooke Shields. And I don't know if any of you will be familiar with this. When this was happening, she opened up and talked about how she experienced postpartum depression, and then there was that controversy where Tom Cruise said that she was so irresponsible to talk about it, and the fact that she took medicine was just crazy, and he's a Scientologist and they just believe crazy things, and it was just rude and mean. And a couple years later, he actually apologized to her. So I picked up the book, but I was like, it took me a few days to like start reading it, just because I was so depressed that I didn't want to do anything. I saw the psychiatrist, and he said that I exhibited, yes, like that all the things that I was experiencing was postpartum depression, and he upped the antidepressant that I was already on. Now at this time, I was still trying to breastfeed, and so you have to be really careful with the type of medication you take. You can't just take anything. The medicine that I was on was safe, so he just upped it, and rather than putting me on something heavy, because at that time I was still like, I really want to try to breastfeed. A big part of me really wanted to quit. Both the psychiatrist and the psychologist said that I should probably try to quit breastfeeding, because breastfeeding actually like spiked my anxiety. Anytime that I had to breastfeed her, or I just thought about breastfeeding her, I started to cry. I didn't want to touch her. I didn't want her to touch me. The fact that she screamed bloody murder every time we tried was really difficult, and I couldn't stand it. Like, thinking about breastfeeding her just made me freak out. And a lot of people encouraged me to quit. My husband he was okay with me quitting, but he did say, I just don't want you to regret it in a few months' time when you're feeling better, when you have overcome this and you realize, wow, I really wish I would have stuck through. And he said that just because he knew how important it was to me before having her, how important it was for me to breastfeed. And a friend of mine was unable to breastfeed due to circumstances beyond her control. And she was so nice to send me an email. She had actually done a lot of research on types of formula and how much they cost at each store. And she sent this to me, and I thought, okay, like at least have all this information in case I need it. And we were having to supplement with formula at the time because of the breastfeeding issues. I finally picked up Down Came the Rain, and I'm going to read just a couple of like little excerpts because, you know, I started reading it and I was like, okay, but then I got to the part where she started to talk about some of her experiences, and it just gave me hope. After enduring 24 long hours of labor and being shot up with antibiotics, Pitocin, and an epidural medicine, I had dilated only 3 centimeters. Now, if you had watched my birth story, you know that I can identify with a lot of that. The doctor gently told me that it was time for him to go in and get the baby. I was so tired at that point. It was a relief to know that something was going to happen. Now, I didn't feel that way, but this is just her section. I was lying unnecessarily flat on my back, and I wondered why the doctors didn't let me sit up, at least until I got to the operating room. It was a strange sensation, being the only one who was horizontal and viewing the world upside down and sideways. All at once, I felt physically and emotionally distant. It was as if I were floating above the scene and watching everything happen to someone else. I was able to identify with that. And a couple chapters later is when this is the part that really hit me and described what I was going through, and I thought, somebody else feels this way. During what had become one of the darkest points in my life, I sat holding my newborn and could not avoid the image of her flying through the air and hitting the wall in front of me. I had no desire to hurt my baby, and I didn't see myself as the one throwing her, thank God. But the wall morphed into a video game, and in it, her little body smacked the surface and slid down onto the floor. I was horrified, and although I know deep in my soul that I would not harm her, the image all but destroyed me. I was desperate to have a natural and healthy connection with my daughter, but it was feeling so forced. It was as if I were trapped behind a thick glass wall. I had never felt apathy in my life. When I had least expected it, it crept in and took over. I couldn't shake the feeling of doom and gloom that pervaded each moment. I was afraid of myself and felt threatened by the dangerous thoughts running so calmly through my head. They all felt too real. When would I wake up from this bad dream? It's horrifying to think certain thoughts and to feel certain ways. And at one point I did ask my psychiatrist if I needed to leave, if I needed to be checked into a hospital, and if I should be concerned that I would be one of those ladies that you see on the news that harms their child. And he said, the fact that I'm aware of that is what tells him that I was not at that point, because there is a difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. And psychosis are what those women are experiencing because they believe that what they are doing is right. They don't sense that anything is wrong. And I did sense that something was wrong. I was seeking help, and that made me feel a lot better because I was scared and I was worried that what if I went there? What if I ended up becoming one of those women? The medicine at the time, it was not working, and he raised it again and it wasn't working, and he did tell me that he thought that I should quit breastfeeding so that I could take a medicine that would have a higher chance of helping me, since just increasing what I was already on was not working. And I really didn't want to quit. I wanted to keep trying, and he did say, then you're going to have to make a decision. Either you are going to continue feeling this way, or you will have to let it go so that we can treat you properly. And I said, okay, I do understand that. And he said there was a medicine that he could give me that wasn't as bad as other medications, but that he'd prefer that I'd still quit breastfeeding, but that if I continued breastfeeding while taking this medication, that I just couldn't breastfeed her right after taking the medicine. So like the first hour after that, I was instructed to pump that milk and get rid of it. And I asked him what it was, and I was a little afraid because he said there was 2 medications that he wanted to try. One was called a kicker, which just is supposed to just kind of knock you back where you need to be, and the other one was one that would help me to not have so many anxiety attacks. And he decided that the kicker would probably be best. The kicker medication was an antipsychotic, and just the words like antipsychotic is what had scared me. And I was like, I have to go on an antipsychotic. But this was pivotal. But I was off that medication within 2 weeks. And I remember that in that 2 weeks, I was finally able to look at her and say that I loved her